The alien ship moved slowly through space toward Earth. Its metal sides were burned and broken. Holes in the hull showed where enemy weapons had hit. Inside the ship, Ambassador Veltar looked out at the blue planet getting closer. His hands shook as he watched. "They have to help us," whispered his helper Norith. Her voice was full of sadness. 7 worlds are dying. 2 billion people need saving. Veltar felt sick with worry. The Korath Empire had attacked without warning. Their huge warships had destroyed cities. Their soldiers took prisoners as slaves. The Zephyrian defense fleet was gone. Only the homeworlds were left, and their shields were failing. The humans were known for helping others. When planets had diseases, humans sent medicine. When disasters struck, humans sent engineers. When people were hungry, humans sent food. If anyone would help the Zephyrians, it would be the humans. Captain Lisa Shaw met them at Luna Station near Earth's moon. She had blonde hair pulled back and blue eyes that showed real concern. She listened carefully as Veltar told her about the attacks. "I understand how serious this is," Captain Shaw said as they walked through the clean white halls of the station. "The pictures you showed us of the Korath attacks are terrible. Earth takes threats to peaceful people very seriously." Veltar felt hope for the first time in weeks. "Then you will give us shelter? We need ships to take 50 million people away from our worlds. We need medicine for the hurt. We need places where our people can live until this is over." Shaw stopped, walking. "Ambassador, I need to tell you something. Humans don't usually help the way other aliens do. When someone attacks our friends, we don't just heal the wounds. We stop the person doing the hurting." The alien diplomat looked confused. "I don't understand. We're not asking you to fight our war. We just need help until we can talk to the Korath and make peace." "The Korath Empire doesn't make peace," Shaw said with a hard voice. "They conquer or they kill. Our spies have watched them for months. This isn't about land or money. They want to wipe you out completely." They entered a room full of screens and computers. Veltar was surprised to see soldiers instead of aid workers. Admiral Jake Morrison stood looking at a big picture of the Zephyrian star system. His face was serious as he studied where the enemy ships were placed. Morrison had served in space for 35 years. His brown hair had gray streaks and his green eyes were steady and strong. When he turned to face the aliens, Veltar felt both safe and scared at the same time. "Ambassador Veltar," Morrison said, holding out his hand. "I've looked at your situation. The Korath have 300 ships around your worlds. 18 of them are huge battleships. They're bombing your planets from space, then sending down troops." "Yes," Veltar said, still confused about why they were talking to soldiers. "That's why we need evacuation ships. Our defenses won't last 2 more weeks." Morrison looked at Captain Shaw, then back at the alien. "Ambassador, let me ask you something. Think carefully before you answer. If the Korath win and take your worlds, what happens to the next peaceful people they find?" The question surprised Veltar. The hegemony of Talseth is in their path next. After that, the unified worlds. "But Admiral, we can't save others if we can't save ourselves." "That's where you're wrong," Morrison said quietly. "Sometimes the only way to save everyone is to stop the threat before it spreads. The Korath have conquered 14 star systems in 5 years. They won't stop with yours." The big screen changed to show the whole galaxy. Red marks showed where the Korath controlled space. The pattern was clear and frightening. They were moving toward more and more populated worlds. "What are you saying?" Veltar asked, though he was starting to guess the answer. Morrison's face got harder. "We're going to end this. The 5th Fleet will leave for your system in 3 days. We're not coming to evacuate people, Ambassador. We're coming to free them." Veltar's whole body went stiff with shock. "You can't be serious. The human fleet is good, but the Korath have more ships and bigger guns. This would be suicide." "Maybe," Morrison agreed. "But here's the thing about humans, Ambassador. We've never been good at running away from bullies, and we've gotten very good at stopping them for good." As the meaning hit him, Veltar realized that humanity was about to do something that had never happened before. They weren't just offering to help refugees. They were volunteering to fight a war that wasn't theirs, against an enemy that had never lost for people they barely knew. "Why?" he whispered. "Why would you risk everything for us?" Morrison looked back at the battle map, where human ship symbols were already appearing next to the Korath positions. "Because, Ambassador, that's what humans do. We don't just help our friends, we make sure they never need help again." Within hours, every human military base in the solar system was busy. The Fifth Fleet began loading supplies and weapons. Crews checked their ships one last time. This was humanity's best fighting force, and they were preparing for the biggest battle of their lives. Commander Amy Rodriguez stood on her battleship watching supply ships bring ammunition. Her ship was 1 kilometer long and packed with the newest human weapons. Her dark hair was pulled back tight and her brown eyes were cold with purpose. "How are we doing?" she asked her weapons officer. "All systems ready, Commander. We have full loads of missiles, plasma torpedoes, and nuclear bombs. The new railguns are working perfectly," Rodriguez nodded. Her ship alone could destroy a small moon, but she knew they would need every advantage. The Korath were known as the best fighters in the galaxy. On the main ship, Admiral Morrison met with his officers one last time. The human force had 47 ships, 12 battleships, 18 cruisers, and 17 destroyers. It was impressive, but the Korath had 7 times as many ships. "Sir," said Colonel Pete Martinez, who commanded the Marines, "we're loading the full 3rd Marine Division. If we can land on any of the Zephyrian worlds, we can help fight on the ground." Morrison studied the enemy positions around each planet. "The Marines won't be needed for defense, Colonel. If this plan works, we'll be attacking their command ships directly." Morrison's plan was bold even for humans. Instead of trying to break the siege with normal fleet fighting, they would use humanity's faster space travel to strike at the heart of the enemy formation. Their target wasn't the ships bombing the planets. It was the massive command ship that controlled the whole operation. "Admiral," said Captain Ryan Bell, Morrison's chief helper, "even if we destroy their command ship, we'll still be outnumbered 6-1. The Korath might be confused, but they won't run away." "No," Morrison agreed. "They won't run. But they will make mistakes. And humans are very good at using mistakes against enemies." On the alien ship, Ambassador Veltar watched human warships forming up for battle. Through the windows, he could see ships covered with weapons that seemed made for one thing: completely destroying their enemies. "This is crazy," Norith whispered beside him. "They're going to get killed, and for what? They could save millions of our people with the same ships they're sending to die." But Veltar was starting to understand something important about humans. He had studied their history during the trip to Earth. He learned about their wars and fights, their tendency toward violence, and their ability to both create and destroy. What he hadn't understood until now was how these traits worked when humans fought for others instead of themselves. Captain Shaw found him watching the fleet prepare to leave. "Ambassador, I know this isn't what you expected when you came asking for help." "No," Veltar said slowly. "It isn't. In all my years as a diplomat, I've never met a species that responds to requests for help by declaring war." Shaw sat down beside him, looking thoughtful. "The thing is, Ambassador, humans have learned something over the years. Charity treats the hurt, but it doesn't cure the disease. The Korath Empire is a disease that spreads by eating peaceful worlds. You can evacuate the victims, heal the wounded, move the survivors, but the disease keeps growing. And if your fleet fails? If Admiral Morrison's plan doesn't work? Then at least we tried to cut out the disease instead of just watching it spread," Shaw replied. "That's the human way, Ambassador. We don't just help people, we try to make sure they never need help again." As the Fifth Fleet prepared to jump to hyperspace, Morrison spoke to all the ships. His voice reached thousands of human sailors and Marines who were about to risk everything for people they had never met. "This is Admiral Morrison to all ships. In 6 hours we will arrive in the Zephyrian system. We will face an enemy that has never been defeated, fighting for people who have never been our allies in a war we chose to enter. Some of you may wonder why we're doing this." The communication channel was quiet, as Morrison chose his words carefully. "The answer is simple. The Korath Empire represents everything humanity has learned to hate. The strong hurting the weak, conquest without mercy, and the belief that might makes right. They have spent 5 years spreading across the galaxy like a plague, and every world they conquer makes them stronger. Morrison's voice got harder. Today, that ends. Today, humanity shows the galaxy that some things are worth fighting for, even when they're not ours. Today, we remind the universe that predators have their place, and that place is beneath us. The mobilization began right away. Within hours of Admiral Morrison's decision, every human military base in the solar system was buzzing with activity. The Fifth Fleet worked fast to get ready for war. Supply ships moved weapons and food to the warships. Mechanics checked every system twice. This was the biggest military operation humans had ever launched to help another species. Commander Amy Rodriguez stood on the bridge of her battleship, looking out at the activity. The ship was called the Defender, and it was one of the newest human designs. 1 kilometer long with the most powerful weapons humanity had ever built. Her dark hair was pulled back and her brown eyes showed the cold focus of a professional soldier. "Give me a status report," she called to her weapons officer. Lieutenant Dan Cooper looked up from his computer screens. "All weapon systems are ready, Commander. We have full loads of kinetic missiles, plasma torpedoes, and nuclear warheads. The new railguns are calibrated and working perfectly." Rodriguez nodded with approval. The Defender alone carried enough firepower to destroy a small moon. But she knew they would need every advantage against the Korath. Intelligence reports painted a scary picture of their enemy. The Korath were a warrior race that had perfected the art of conquest through pure brutality. On the flagship Vengeance, Admiral Morrison went over the final fleet numbers with his staff. The human response force had 47 ships, 12 battleships, 18 cruisers, and 17 destroyers. There were also support ships carrying supplies and fuel. It was an impressive force by any measure, but the Korath had nearly 7 times as many ships. "Sir," said Colonel Pete Martinez, who commanded the fleet's Marines, "we're loading the full 3rd Marine Division. 20,000 soldiers ready for ground combat. If we can establish a foothold on any of the Zephyrian worlds, we can provide support from the surface." Morrison studied the tactical display showing the positions of Korath ships around each Zephyrian world. "The Marines won't be needed for defensive operations, Colonel. If this plan works, we'll be taking the fight directly to their command ships." The plan Morrison had developed was bold even by human standards. Rather than try to break the siege through normal fleet fighting, the Fifth Fleet would use humanity's superior faster-than-light technology to strike at the heart of the Korath formation. Their target wasn't the siege ships bombing the planets. It was the massive command ship that coordinated the entire operation. Captain Ryan Bell, Morrison's chief of staff, said what everyone was thinking. "Admiral, even if we succeed in taking out their command structure, we'll still be outnumbered 6-1. The Korath may be disorganized, but they're not going to run away." "No," Morrison agreed. "They won't run, but they will make mistakes. And humans are very good at taking advantage of mistakes." The human approach to this crisis was completely different from how other species handled threats. Most civilizations would have sent hospital ships, transport vessels, and supply convoys. They would have focused on saving as many lives as possible through evacuation and aid. Humanity was sending warships loaded with enough weapons to level continents. Meanwhile, aboard the diplomatic vessel Harmony's Voice, Ambassador Veltar struggled to understand what he was seeing. Through the viewports, he could see human warships forming up in battle formations. Their hulls were covered with weapons that seemed designed for one purpose: the complete destruction of their enemies. "This is madness," Norith whispered beside him. "They're going to get themselves killed, and for what? They could evacuate millions of our people with the same ships they're sending to die." But Veltar was beginning to grasp something profound about humanity. He had studied their history during the journey to Earth, learning about their wars and conflicts, their tendency toward violence and their capacity for both creation and destruction. What he hadn't understood until now was how those traits showed themselves when humans fought for others rather than themselves. Captain Shaw found him in the observation lounge as the fleet prepared to depart. "Ambassador, I know this isn't what you expected when you came seeking aid. No, Veltar replied slowly. It isn't. In all my years of diplomacy, I've never encountered a species that responds to requests for humanitarian assistance by declaring war. Shaw settled into a chair beside him, her expression thoughtful. The thing is, Ambassador, humans have learned something over the centuries. Charity treats symptoms, but it doesn't cure diseases. The Korath Empire is a disease that spreads by consuming peaceful worlds. You can evacuate the victims, treat the wounded, relocate the survivors, but the cancer keeps growing. And if your fleet fails? If Admiral Morrison's gamble doesn't pay off? Then at least we tried to cut out the cancer instead of just watching it spread, Shaw replied. That's the human way, Ambassador. We don't just help people. We try to make sure they never need help again. The preparation work continued around the clock. Human engineers loaded the ships with spare parts and repair equipment. Medical teams prepared for casualties. Intelligence officers updated target lists and battle plans. Every person involved understood they were about to attempt something that had never been done before. Dr. Susan Walsh, the fleet's chief medical officer, supervised the loading of medical supplies onto the hospital ship Hope. Unlike other species' medical ships, the Hope was heavily armored and carried defensive weapons. Even their hospital ship was built for war. Doctor, asked her assistant, why are we bringing so much surgical equipment? The Admiral said this would be a quick strike mission. Dr. Walsh looked grim as she checked her supply lists. Because, Lieutenant, when humans go to war, we plan for the worst and hope for the best. And this is going to be the worst battle our fleet has ever fought. The human approach to warfare was different from other species in important ways. Most aliens fought defensive wars to protect their territory. Humans had developed the ability to project power across vast distances to protect others. Their ships were designed for long-range operations far from home. Their crews were trained to fight and win even when outnumbered. Admiral Morrison called his ship captains together for a final briefing. The holographic display showed the Zephyrian system, with red markers indicating Korath positions. The enemy had arranged their ships in a classic siege formation, with the biggest ships in the center and smaller vessels forming a protective screen. Ladies and gentlemen, Morrison began, in 12 hours we will drop out of hyperspace right on top of the enemy command ship. They won't expect us because no sane military force would attack the center of a superior enemy formation. Commander Rodriguez raised her hand. Admiral, what makes you think we can succeed where the Zephyrian fleet failed? Morrison's smile was cold. Because the Zephyrians fought a defensive war, Commander. They tried to protect their worlds by stopping the enemy at their borders. We're going to fight an offensive war. We're going to hurt them so badly they'll never want to fight peaceful worlds again. The difference was crucial. Defensive warfare was about holding ground and minimizing losses. Offensive warfare was about destroying the enemy's ability and will to fight. Humans had centuries of experience with both types of combat. Captain Tom Baker of the destroyer Swift spoke up. Sir, our intelligence suggests the Korath have never faced serious resistance before. Most of their victories came against species that surrendered quickly. Exactly, Morrison replied. They're used to fighting people who give up when things get difficult. They've never fought people who get more dangerous when cornered. Today they learn what that feels like. As the final preparations continued, human crews worked with the efficiency that came from years of training together. Unlike other species that relied on individual ship commanders making independent decisions, humans fought as a coordinated force. Every ship knew its role in the overall plan. Lieutenant Sarah Martinez, a communications officer on the cruiser Guardian, monitored radio traffic as the fleet made final preparations. Captain, all ships report ready for hyperspace jump. The Admiral is requesting final confirmation from all task force commanders. Captain James Wilson of the Guardian reviewed his ship's status one last time. Tell the Admiral that Guardian is ready. All weapons loaded, all systems green, crew at battle stations. Similar reports came in from every ship in the fleet. 47 human vessels ready to risk everything for people they had never met, in a war that wasn't theirs, against an enemy that had never been defeated. As the Fifth Fleet prepared to enter hyperspace, Morrison issued his final orders to the task force commanders. His voice carried across every ship in the formation, reaching thousands of human sailors and marines who were about to risk everything for a people they had never met. This is Admiral Morrison to all ships. In approximately 6 hours, we will drop out of hyperspace in the Zephyrian system. We will be facing an enemy that has never been defeated, fighting for people who have never been our allies, in a war that we chose to enter. Some of you may be wondering why we're doing this. The communication channel remained silent as Morrison paused, choosing his words carefully. The answer is simple. The Korath Empire represents everything that humanity has learned to despise: the strong preying on the weak, conquest without mercy, and the belief that might makes right. The Fifth Fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Zephyrian system, like hunters appearing from nowhere. Admiral Morrison stood on the bridge of the Vengeance, looking at the screens that showed the full scope of the Korath siege operation. 18 massive enemy battleships held position around Zephyr Prime, their weapons firing constantly at the planet's failing shields. Dozens of smaller ships formed protective circles while troop carriers prepared for the final ground attack. "Dear God," whispered Commander Rodriguez over the communication channel. "They're not just conquering the planet, they're trying to wipe out everything on it." Morrison's jaw tightened as he watched the energy readings from the bombardment. The Korath weren't targeting military bases or factories. They were systematically destroying cities full of civilians. This wasn't conquest. It was genocide carried out with cold efficiency. "All ships battle stations," Morrison commanded. "Remember the plan. We hit their command ship first, then work our way through their formation. No mercy, no quarter. These monsters chose to wage war on innocent people." The human fleet moved toward the inner system, hidden by electronic jamming and stealth fields that made them look like background radiation on enemy sensors. The Korath, confident in their overwhelming numbers, had posted only light sensor watches on the system's edge. It was a mistake that would cost them everything. Warlord Grakthul commanded the Korath siege from the bridge of his flagship Death's Dominion, a 3-kilometer monster that served as both command center and symbol of Korath power. His species had evolved from pack hunters, and their culture kept the brutal efficiency of predators who had never learned mercy. When his sensor officer detected the approaching human fleet, Grakthul's reaction was amusement rather than concern. 47 ships? He growled, his voice carrying the harsh tones of his species. "The humans send 47 ships against 300? Have they come to surrender for the Zephyrians?" But as the human fleet drew closer, Grakthul began to understand that surrender was not their plan. The approaching vessels moved with the precision of a military formation that had trained together for years. Their weapon systems were already charging for combat. Most disturbing was their approach direction. They weren't moving to engage his outer ships or establish a defensive line around the planet. They were heading straight for his flagship. "Impossible," snarled his tactical officer. "No species would be so foolish as to attack the heart of our formation. It's suicide." Morrison's voice crackled across all radio frequencies as the human fleet reached weapons range. "Korath Fleet, this is Admiral Jake Morrison of the human Fifth Fleet. You have exactly one opportunity to withdraw from this system and never return. Refuse, and we will show you why humanity doesn't negotiate with genocidal killers." Grakthul's response was a harsh laugh that echoed across the Korath communication network. "Humans, you are brave but stupid. We are 300 ships strong and you are less than 50. Your courage will make excellent stories for our young warriors." "That's what I thought you'd say," Morrison replied coldly. "All ships execute Operation Sledgehammer." The human attack began with a coordinated missile barrage that lit up space like a small star being born. Thousands of kinetic penetrators and plasma torpedoes streaked toward the Korath formation, their targeting systems locked onto the largest and most important vessels. The Death's Dominion found itself the focus of concentrated fire from 12 human battleships, their combined firepower like a supernova in miniature. But the Korath flagship was built to withstand such punishment. Its shields absorbed the initial attack while its own weapons began returning fire. Massive plasma cannons that could vaporize smaller ships with single shots. The battle quickly became a savage slugging match, with both sides trading devastating blows at close range. Commander Rodriguez felt the defender shake as Korath plasma bolts slammed into her shields. Damage report. Shield generators at 60%, called her engineering officer. Hull breaches on decks 7 and 12. We're holding together, but we can't take much more of this. Then we'd better finish this quickly, Rodriguez replied grimly. All weapons target their primary command tower. Let's cut the head off this snake. The human fleet had trained for exactly this scenario. Overwhelming force concentrated against a single, critical target. While the Korath formation was larger and more powerful overall, the humans had achieved local superiority around the enemy flagship. Every human ship focused their fire on the Death's Dominion, pouring thousands of tons of metal and energy into its massive hull. Grakthul watched in growing alarm as his flagship's defenses began to fail. Human weapons were proving more effective than intelligence reports had suggested. Their kinetic penetrators punched through armor that should have stopped them cold. More disturbing was their tactical coordination. Every human ship seemed to know exactly where its companions were targeting, creating overlapping fields of fire that maximized damage. All ships converge on the flagship, Grakthul commanded. Protect the Death's Dominion. But the human fleet had expected this response. As Korath vessels moved to defend their command ship, they found themselves entering carefully prepared killing zones where human destroyers waited with full spreads of torpedoes. The smaller human ships, more maneuverable than their Korath counterparts, darted through the enemy formation like deadly wasps, striking at weak points and withdrawing before return fire could find them. Lieutenant Cooper, manning the tactical station on the Defender, called out target updates with mechanical precision. Korath cruiser bearing 27 Mark III shields down, firing full spread. The Defender's railgun spoke with the voice of controlled thunder, sending depleted uranium slugs downrange at significant fractions of light speed. The targeted Korath vessel came apart in a brilliant explosion that briefly outshone the system's star. Throughout the battle, Admiral Morrison maintained constant communication with his fleet commanders, adjusting tactics in real time as the situation developed. This was humanity's greatest advantage. Not just their weapons or technology, but their ability to adapt and coordinate under the most extreme circumstances. Rodriguez, take your squadron and hit their troop transports, Morrison ordered. Martinez, launch your Marines at the damaged battleship on the port flank. If we can capture it, we can use their own guns against them. The battle raged for 3 hours, with neither side giving ground. Korath ships exploded in brilliant fireballs while human vessels went dark and silent as their crews died at their posts. But slowly, inevitably, the tide began to turn in humanity's favor. The human advantage wasn't just in weapons or tactics. It was in their willingness to sacrifice everything for others. Korath warriors fought for conquest and glory. Human sailors fought for the lives of 2 billion innocent people they had never met. That difference showed in every decision, every maneuver, every desperate last stand. Captain Tom Baker of the destroyer Swift rammed his damaged ship into a Korath cruiser when his weapons failed. The explosion took out both vessels, but it also opened a gap in the enemy formation that other human ships exploited ruthlessly. "Sir," reported Captain Bell from the tactical center, "the Swift is gone, but their sacrifice cleared the way for the Guardian and the Protector to reach the enemy flagship's rear quarter." Morrison's face showed no emotion, but his voice carried the weight of command decisions that cost lives. "Order all ships to concentrate fire on the Death's Dominion's engine section. If we can cripple their flagship, the rest of their fleet will lose coordination." The Death's Dominion finally began to succumb to the concentrated human barrage. Its massive hull started breaking apart in a series of catastrophic explosions that sent debris spinning through space. Secondary explosions rippled along its length as ammunition stores and fuel tanks went up like a chain of firecrackers. "Their flagship is breaking up," reported Captain Bell. "Massive secondary explosions throughout the hull. She's finished." With their command ship destroyed and their leader dead, the Korath formation began to lose cohesion. Individual ship commanders, lacking central coordination, started making their own decisions. Some tried to continue the siege. Others attempted to withdraw to the outer system. A few turned to face the human fleet in desperate last stands. "Their formation is breaking up," reported Captain Bell. "Looks like individual ships are trying to withdraw to the outer system." Morrison's expression showed no mercy. Negative. Let none of them escape. If even one Korath ship survives to report our tactics, they'll adapt, and the next peaceful world won't be so lucky. The human fleet pursued the fleeing Korath vessels with relentless efficiency, hunting them down one by one across the vast reaches of the star system. It was no longer a battle. It was an extermination, conducted with the cold professionalism that had made human military forces legendary throughout known space. Some Korath ships tried to hide in asteroid fields. Human destroyers followed them in and finished them at close range. Others attempted to reach the system's edge and escape to hyperspace. Human cruisers, faster and more maneuverable, caught them before they could jump away. The few Korath vessels that tried to surrender found that humans weren't interested in prisoners. 3 weeks after the battle, Ambassador Veltar stood in the rebuilt council chambers of Zephyr Prime, looking out at a world that was slowly coming back to life. The constant plasma bombing had ended. The evacuation shelters were empty. Children played in the streets for the first time in months. The human fleet maintained a protective circle around the system, their presence a constant reminder that the nightmare was truly over. Admiral Morrison had been invited to speak to the Zephyrian High Council, an honor reserved for the most important visitors to their world. As he stood before the assembled representatives of 7 worlds, his weathered face showed the exhaustion of a man who had carried the weight of an entire civilization's survival on his shoulders. Admiral Morrison, began Councillor Etheron, the elected leader of the Zephyrian Alliance. We find ourselves in a position that our language lacks words to describe. You have given us our lives, our freedom, and our future. How does one express gratitude for such a gift? Morrison shifted uncomfortably, clearly not used to such formal recognition. Counselor, with respect, we didn't give you anything. We simply removed the obstacles that were preventing you from living your lives as you chose. The courage, the rebuilding, the future, that's all yours. Veltar rose from his seat, his crystalline features reflecting the chamber's soft lighting. Admiral, I must ask you something that has troubled me since we first met. When my people came to Earth seeking aid, we expected humanitarian assistance. Food, medicine, shelter for refugees. Instead, you gave us war. Why? The question hung in the air as Morrison considered his response. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of human philosophy that had evolved over centuries of conflict and cooperation. Ambassador, let me tell you a story about humanity. Thousands of years ago, our ancestors lived in small tribes, constantly threatened by predators and hostile neighbors. They learned 2 important lessons. First, that running away from a threat doesn't make it disappear. It just moves the problem somewhere else. Second, that the only way to truly protect your family is to make sure the threat can never hurt anyone again. Morrison gestured toward the viewport, where human ships could be seen patrolling the system's boundaries. When you came to us asking for help, we saw the Korath Empire the same way our ancestors saw a pack of wolves threatening their village. We could have given you shelter, fed your refugees, treated your wounded, but that wouldn't have saved you. It would have just delayed your destruction while the wolves grew stronger. Commander Rodriguez, who had been granted leave to attend the ceremony, added her perspective. The Korath weren't just threatening your world's counselor. Our intelligence indicated they would have moved on to the Talseth hegemony next, then the Centauri Collective. Each conquest would have made them stronger, until eventually no force in the galaxy could have stopped them. So you stopped them here, Veltar said slowly, understanding beginning to dawn. You didn't just save us. You saved everyone they would have conquered next. That's part of it, Morrison agreed. But there's something else you need to understand about humanity. We have a saying, evil triumphs when good people do nothing. The Korath Empire represented everything we despise, the strong preying on the weak, conquest without mercy, the belief that might makes right. We couldn't stand by and watch that cancer spread, even if it never threatened Earth directly. Councillor Ethron leaned forward, his ancient features creased with confusion. But the cost, Admiral. You lost 8 ships and over 3,000 crew members fighting a war that wasn't yours. How do you justify such sacrifice to your own people? Morrison's expression hardened with memory. Every one of those crew members volunteered for this mission, counselor. When they learned what the Korath were doing to peaceful worlds, they lined up to be part of the response fleet. You see, humans have another saying. The only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. Captain Shaw, who had accompanied the delegation from Earth, stepped forward. What the Admiral is trying to explain is that humans don't view aid the way most species do. We don't just treat symptoms, we cure diseases. The Korath Empire was a disease that would have kept spreading until someone stopped it permanently. The implications slowly sank in among the Zephyrian leadership. Humanity had committed an act of galactic significance, not just saving one alliance but potentially preventing the conquest of dozens of worlds. Their approach to helping others was fundamentally different from any other species in known space. There's something else, Morrison continued. The destruction of the Korath siege fleet has sent shockwaves throughout their empire. Our intelligence indicates that several conquered worlds are rising in rebellion, believing that if humans could defeat the invincible Korath, then freedom might be possible. The empire is fracturing from within. Veltar felt a chill of recognition. You didn't just defeat them. You broke the myth of their invincibility. Exactly. Empires built on fear and oppression are surprisingly fragile when that fear is broken. The Korath conquered through intimidation as much as firepower. Now that intimidation is gone. Over the following days, as the human fleet prepared to return to Earth, the true scope of their intervention became clear. Intelligence reports indicated that Korath-controlled systems throughout their empire were experiencing uprisings. The carefully constructed facade of invincible conquest was crumbling, replaced by the knowledge that someone had finally stood up to the bullies and won. Dr. Susan Walsh, the fleet's chief medical officer, had spent the weeks after the battle, treating wounded Zephyrian civilians in the planet's hospitals. She found their injuries heartbreaking, but their gratitude overwhelming. Doctor, asked a young Zephyrian nurse, why did your people risk so much for strangers? Most species in the galaxy would have offered us refuge, not warfare. Dr. Walsh paused in her work, considering the question. Because, child, sometimes the most compassionate thing you can do is to eliminate the source of suffering, rather than just treat its effects. A surgeon doesn't just bandage a tumor, they cut it out completely. But perhaps more importantly, news of humanity's intervention spread throughout the peaceful civilizations of the galaxy. Species that had lived in fear of aggressive neighbors began to reconsider their defensive postures. If humans were willing to fight wars that weren't theirs to protect species they barely knew, what did that mean for the future of galactic civilization? The Talseth hegemony, which had been next on the Korath expansion list, sent a formal message of gratitude to Earth. The Centauri Collective offered to establish permanent trade agreements. Dozens of smaller civilizations that had never even heard of humanity suddenly wanted to know more about this species that fought for others. Colonel Martinez, who had commanded the Marine forces during the battle, found himself in conversation with Zephyrian military officers who wanted to understand human tactics. Colonel, asked General Wynath of the Zephyrian Defense Force, your fleet was outnumbered 7-1, yet you achieved total victory with minimal losses. How is this possible? Martinez considered the question carefully. General, most species fight defensively. They try to protect what they have and minimize their losses. Humans fight offensively when we believe in the cause. We don't fight to avoid losing. We fight to win completely. The distinction was crucial and went to the heart of human military philosophy. Other species saw war as a last resort, something to be endured and ended as quickly as possible. Humans saw it as a tool to be used decisively when diplomacy failed and justice demanded action. Ambassador Veltar found Admiral Morrison in the observation lounge of the Vengeance on the night before the fleet's departure. The human officer stood silently before the viewport, watching the lights of Zephyr Prime's cities twinkling in the darkness. You've changed everything, you know, Veltar said quietly. Not just for us, but for the entire galaxy. Word of what humanity did here is spreading faster than our fastest ships can carry it. Morrison nodded slowly. That was partly the point, Ambassador. The galaxy has lived under the shadow of predator species for too long. Someone needed to demonstrate that predators can be stopped permanently by those willing to stand up to them. And you chose to be those people. We didn't choose anything, Morrison replied. When you came to Earth asking for help, the choice was already made. Humans don't abandon friends, and we don't ignore evil when we see it. That's not who we are. The conversation was interrupted by a communication from Earth. President Helen Carter appeared on the screen, her face showing both pride and concern. Admiral Morrison, the entire human population has been following your mission. I want you to know that every person on Earth supports what you've accomplished. You've shown the galaxy what humanity stands for. Morrison saluted his commander-in-chief. Thank you, Madam President. The crew of the Fifth Fleet is honored to have served. There's something else, Admiral. We've received over 200 requests for assistance from various species throughout the galaxy. It seems word of your victory has inspired others to ask for help with their own oppressor problems. Morrison's smile was grim. Then I guess we'd better start building more ships, Madam President.